Hi there. I am Teri Slater, a financial coach. I help you gain clarity and awareness around your spending and spending behaviors so that you can be more confident in securing your own financial future. So, today, what I wanted to talk about is whether or not you should use credit cards. If you have ever listened to certain personal finance gurus, if you will, there's a lot of information out there that says you need to cut up the credit cards and stop using them. But I just want to talk for a minute about how that doesn't have to be the only way. So let's talk about whether or not you feel like you might be a candidate for continuing to use credit cards, even though you might have some debt. One of the first things that I want to ask you is with your debt, is it something where your balances are growing month over month and you're paying interest on that debt, meaning that you're not really even coming close to paying off that credit card in full every single month? If that is the case, then you might want to consider putting those credit cards away and just only using your debit card in the future. And the reason is when you are attaching your spending to the actual cash that's in your bank account and you know that a purchase will not be approved if there's not enough money to cover it, that's where you can really start to gain a lot more awareness around your spending and your choices and realizing that sometimes you might have to say no to something if you know there's not enough money for it. The thing with credit cards is that so often they really do enable us to go in, make a purchase, and then think about how to pay for it after the fact. And really, that's one of the keys is that as long as you can pay for things when your statement comes to you and you're able to pay that off in full, or at least, almost the entire amount in full. I realize that sometimes people have payment timing. So they may not pay it off in full right away, but they do make payments on that account during the month so that they're not carrying a balance forward, continually. So I really think that that's one of the key factors is whether or not it's not that you use credit cards. Some people use credit cards, but they're not in debt, right? So whether or not you are in debt and you are paying interest on that credit card, or especially if you're only making the minimum monthly payment or slightly over, then that's probably a good indicator that you might want to tuck those credit cards away and just start using a debit card only. I know that transition can actually feel a little bit challenging for people sometimes because maybe the money isn't there in their checking account right now to start that process. So sometimes that has to be a slightly slow process to morph away from using that credit card and into just being on a cash only basis. But I really do believe that when you move to a cash only basis, it starts to dramatically change the way that you make a lot of decisions with how you're spending your money. Okay, another thing that I want to point out really quickly, I know that a lot of people use their credit cards for points or for cash back. There's certain benefits that come with some credit cards, and that's why some people use credit cards instead of just a debit card. But I do just want to point back to there's a historical study. I'm sure there's multiple studies at this point, but there are historical studies that show that people do actually just spend more than what they normally would when they're using a credit card. So I'm definitely going to date myself here, but some of you might remember a time when certain fast food restaurants, you couldn't go in and pay with a card. Right. I mean, our debit cards used to just be an ATM card. We didn't get to use them as transactions right out of our bank account like we've been able to do now for quite some time. But I'll just call it out. Places like McDonald's used to be cash only. That was the only way that you were going to eat there was if you had cash. And they actually were very resistant to start accepting, let's say debit cards or credit cards. They were a little bit hesitant to start accepting credit cards because they kind of actually liked their cash only system. But when they did a trial run and started allowing people to use credit cards, they found that people were spending significantly more. And these numbers are not right out of a study. I would need to look it up and reference these again, but it's something to the tune of if the average check was, $7.36, it went up closer to like $10 to $12 per check. So people were just spending more money when they were able to use a card. So if that tells you nothing, that should at least just kind of point out that there is a little bit of psychology there that is worth noting, right? There's a tactical pain that we go through when we're actually departing with our cash, in a way that just, it doesn't have the same trigger and response in the brain to hand over plastic, because that's something that we're looking at later as far as when to pay that off. So, there's certain studies like that I think are noteworthy when we start to have like a cash versus credit discussion as well. Okay, so again, if your balance is growing every month, so maybe you're in a situation where you do the majority, if not all of your spending is on a credit card, and then you just take your monthly income, whatever paychecks you have coming in, and those go to pay off the credit card, right? If you at the end of the month are ending up with an empty checking account and your credit card still has a balance on it, then we're starting to look at that's overspending, right? You're spending more than what you have coming in. Now, some people say, well, I still pay my credit card off every month. And I will sometimes subsequently ask, are you pulling money or transferring money out of like a savings account or some sort of like a slush fund account, in order to make sure that that credit card gets paid off in full? At the end of the day, if you are putting more on your credit card than your income is coming in, then that might be a sign that you're doing some overspending. And so anytime there's overspending happening where you are just spending more goes out than what comes in, then that may be a circumstance where you might want to put away the credit cards, or at least start to have a much more detailed discipline in looking at your numbers and documenting what you plan to spend and how much you are actually spending. So again, I think really one of the most important things is just to know your numbers. One of the first questions that I ask clients that I'm working with is, how much do you spend every month on food? And that generally means two things. Number one, it's grocery stores. And number two, it's going out to eat. And those numbers are typically, number one, they're variable. They're super variable. People tend to spend a lot more or less than they really think that they are. And I will say that more than not, they are low, they're estimating low. So if I ask somebody, how much do you spend just at the grocery store? They kind of do this thing where they're like, well, I don't know, I was just there the other day, got a week's worth of groceries. It was about $100. And I'm like, okay, so you spend about $400 a month in groceries. Does that sound right? And they'll say, yeah, plus or minus a little bit. Yes, that's fine. And then once we start cranking through the numbers, if we see that, somehow this math just doesn't seem to be working out, and we go through and line item, look at how much they spent in the grocery store, and it ends up being $650, that's a significant difference from $400. So knowing your numbers, knowing what your spending looks like, that's really one of the key factors in making this decision of whether or not you should be using a credit card or not. So the choice is always up to you, but I just am a huge fan of like self-awareness. And I will tell you that in the entire time that I was working on getting out of debt, there were no credit cards in play. Did I still have the credit cards? Yes, I did, but I just did not use them. I used my checking debit, card only. And for me, it's because I knew that I really had to undergo a lot of like behavior modification, right? So I just needed to know that like I can't spend more than what's coming in every month. And it caused me to, it took so long to pay off. It was $200,000 in debt. And so that took 6 years to pay off. And because that was such an intense process, an intense amount of time, it caused me to change. I, as a person, just completely changed how I was with money, for good. And so now I do most all of my spending is only on a credit card. It's paid off every month in full, but further than that, and I know I might err on the side of like a little geeky about this, but I actually pay my credit card every week. So for me, it's like I've done a week's worth of spending. I want my checking account to reflect this week's worth of spending. So I want that money to disappear from my checking account, because that feels very tangible to me. That is like my reality check of how much I spent on a weekly basis. So I'm not suggesting that you do that. That's just what I do, but that's because that is how I now manage my own finances. So if you want any help in talking this through or making this decision for yourself, or if you need help getting a little bit more clear about where your spending is going, you can always schedule a call with me. I do work with folks one-on-one, again, to really help you gain clarity and confidence with your numbers. So you can reach out to me. I'll put a link below the video. It's terislater.com/call, and you can schedule a call with me. I'd be happy to chat with you. All right, take care and have a great day.